here with Christine Ristaino, author of All the Silent Spaces. Welcome, Christine. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So I understand you're going to do a reading for us today.
Yes, I am. It's from the prologue of my book. The shopping cart we find in the parking lot has Cinderella on it, and my children think they are at Disneyland. Their chubby arms and legs move with purpose as they climb inside. As I push my children toward the store, I glance down at them. They're cute. I know this about my kids. My curly hair blows in the breeze, lifting and settling every few seconds near the sides of my face. When I reach the sidewalk and the wheels become stuck on the curb, a man on a bench stands and walks in our direction. I see him and acknowledge him with a nod, hoping he'll help me lift the cart onto the sidewalk. The man grabs the shopping cart with one hand, and with the other, he throws his fist into my face. The pain concentrates on the bridge of my nose for a second, and then moves into my head. I can feel something open up inside me. I smell blood as it flows out my nose. The man is wiry. I keep my hands on the cart, wanting to create space underneath for my children, who are somewhere below me. Something isn't right with my shoulder. All the ligaments, muscles, and skin are pulling off the bone, and the bone itself seems to move away from the socket. Each time it is pulled, I feel a wave of nausea. I want to crouch low to the ground and nurse my arm, but my children are below. I squeeze the cart, almost touching my palms to my fingers. I stare at the man's face. It is angular, thin. It does not smile. The lips press themselves together, wormy, contemptuous. I hear a crack. It sounds like the snap of a chicken bone. This time it's my jaw. The force brings my head back. My neck hits my shoulders. Another wave of nausea, and something wire-like pulls against my arm. It's my purse strap. It must be caught in the cart. I thrust my shoulder back to keep it in place, and this brings on searing pain. He moves closer. His breath is sour. There's blood on my face and my hand. He tries to yank my purse from me, so that's what this is about. You're a prick, I say, and his eyes move away from mine. He steps back, and then his fist strikes my right eye. I am retching. The muscles in both arms ache with this new force. I let go of the cart and cover my face with my hands. The purse strap slides off my shoulder. I'm falling. There's the thud of my own head and a sharp pain where it hits the pavement. Dots appear and disappear in front of me. An electrical current, the wiring all wrong. Blood creeps through the cracks of my hands. And then I hear his footsteps as they recede and look to see my two children inches away, staring from the princess cart. I can feel the cold blacktop on my skin. I hear a child wailing. It's my daughter. I'm covered in my own blood. I want to close my eyes.
So when did you decide to write a book about these events, Christine?
So I decided that the moment that I just described was kind of the catalyst for writing this book, because when this happened, a few days later, people started asking me the race of my attacker. And I was pretty banged up. I had a black eye. I had kind of a broken nose, slight concussion, red marks all over my neck. And I was, really upset that people were asking me the race of the attacker rather than asking me how I was or how my children were. So I kind of responded in a very negative, angry way. And that stopped communication from happening. Any point that I wanted to make about the question was lost. And basically, the conversation ended when I desperately needed to talk to people. And so that was the first part of it. I decided I needed to change the way I talked about this subject with people. And so I started asking people nicely, could you explain to me why you asked me that question? And when I asked that, they responded with really interesting responses, and I started writing them down. So I would write the whole conversation out, and then I would give them back the conversation. They would read it, and then they would tell me if I was accurate, if I had understood them well, or if I hadn't. And once they handed it back to me, I would take that manuscript and I would either revise it or I would create a whole new dialogue. And I started putting all of these pieces together. And initially, I thought my book was about race. And I kept having conversations on race, but for about a year and a half. And what was interesting was that while I was having these conversations, I learned so much from people who had experienced racism. And I realized that I also had a story to tell. And it involved two experiences that I had not been courageous about, that I had not talked about at all. And one was I had been molested as a young child, and the other was I had been raped at age 21, my early 20s. I had never mentioned these two events. Barely, in my opinion, they barely affected me. And so finally, about a year and a half into the book, I realized that I needed to add these two events into the book. And so I did. But that meant talking to other people about it. And it also meant telling my parents about the events too, because they didn't know about it. I told my parents, and they were amazing. They basically supported me all the way. And I also told my brothers about it, and they were also quite incredible. And something really interesting happened during that process. I had always been a mediator, but I found that I was shifting as a result of writing this book and actually revealing to my parents and brothers that this event had happened. And I suddenly stopped mediating and started speaking my own truth. And it wasn't even a slow process. That part of the process happened very, very fast. And I attribute it to the fact that I was talking about a man that my family loved and a man who I loved too. And I really never spoke to anybody about this kind of negative truth. He was a man who was wonderfully funny. He was a great cook. He was the life of the party, and everybody had a very positive opinion about him. And then there was almost this black line, this negative truth about him. And I went along with the positive truth, but I never acknowledged my negative truth. And I think when it becomes easy to disregard or to ignore something that is that big, it becomes very easy to ignore your own truth in general, like what kind of sandwich you want or what you feel in any given situation. So I would mediate instead. I didn't even know what my truth was. And I ended up mediating with people, my colleagues, my family, etc. And I became very good at it. But when I finally discovered my own truth, when my voice finally emerged, when I finally let go of that secret, I saw my own voice. I felt my own voice in my head, my heart, and my stomach. And it was wonderful.
Was there anything that surprised you in the process of writing the book?
I think that part was the part that surprised me, because I really didn't know what it would feel like to hear my own voice. I was so young when the first event happened that I spent a majority of my life without a voice, just trying to please people. And I was delightful in a lot of ways because of that, because I just wanted everyone to be happy, and I would do anything as far as mediating to make people feel good, to make them feel happy, to get them to get along. And I think when I finally heard my own voice and felt my own truth, it was so surprising and so wonderful at the same time. And I didn't expect it. I I had felt that I needed to write this book. I didn't know what was compelling me to write down conversations on race. I knew that I had grown up in an Italian American town and that there was very little diversity, and I felt compelled to explore racism and diversity because I didn't understand it. And initially, I think I said, if I can learn something from this experience, from this attack, it, it will be somewhat worthwhile. But what I didn't count on was that I would find my own truth there. And it really was because of the people who were courageous enough to share their own truth. And they modeled that for me. And as a result of them modeling, talking about difficult things in a very graceful, wonderful way with power, strength, and eloquence, that I gained the power and the courage actually to look at my own truth. And it was surprising that talking about this with my family would actually lead to peace and courage and power and strength and mastery of my own life, or actually being a player in my own life.
And what has your experience been with the method you chose to publish?
So I'm working with She Writes Press, and it's a hybrid press. And what that means is that you are chosen, you have to submit your manuscript, and they read through all of the manuscripts, and they don't accept all of them. They choose the manuscripts that they want to work with. But you also have to pay to get your work published. And if it's a manuscript that isn't up to snuff, if it's not of the quality of She Writes, then at times they will offer to writers the opportunity to work with them, and they will help the writer get their manuscript to a good point. But for the most part, they accept your manuscript, and then you basically, they might give you a couple things to work on, a couple things to change, and you change them, and then you go through the editing process, and they send you a first draft, a second, a third, a fourth. You look through everything. They may give you more suggestions or do some editing, and then it's ready. Before you know it, it's ready to be published. They help you pick out a cover, an image. They're wonderful at what they do. And I really have had a very positive experience with She Writes Press. One of the most amazing parts of working with She Writes Press, and I think it's quite unique as far as publishers are concerned, they give you this whole community of women. And it's not a competitive community. It is a community of support and love, really. And so I found that all of the women that I'm working with through She Writes have been incredibly supportive. There are thousands of She Writes published women, and hundreds of women publishing their documents right now, or their books. And that's really exciting. And it's just great to have such a vibrant community, such a talented community. I've worked with Brooke Warner and Lauren Wise this year on my book, and they are two incredible women. They work for She Writes Press, and they are really, really wonderful, talented writers. They're extremely talented editors. They know what they're doing. They have great advice, and they're incredibly supportive. And on their own, they're both two powerhouses. So I've had a wonderful experience with She Writes Press, and I highly recommend it. It's just a great press, and a press that works with women to get their voices out there and to empower them. And that's exactly what they've done for me.
And your book is about 3 experiences with violence that you have experienced. What do you want to change regarding how we talk about violence, sexual assault, and abuse?
So I am really hoping that my book can help talk about, I guess, the abusers themselves, the people who commit these acts, because as a survivor of 3 acts of violence, it has been very difficult to look at the kind of the paradigm that's set up for us, where the person who has committed an act of violence or molestation is either a wonderful person or a monster, right? And if that's the paradigm, if you have experienced molestation, for example, then and it's somebody that you love, and for me it was somebody that I absolutely loved and admired, then if that person fits into this paradigm, then they're either wonderful or they're a monster. And so how can you believe that a wonderful person committed something like molestation if molestation is equated with being a monster? It's very hard. So I barely even believed that the event had happened myself, because I don't know, that whole paradigm threw me off. Initially, I didn't even realize what had happened because I was so young. And when I finally did realize what had happened, I said, could that have been something I imagined? Because it doesn't make sense with this person. It doesn't make any sense at all. And it also works for the survivor's family and friends, because basically the survivor's family and friends look at that person as a wonderful person too. And when you're faced with the monster, wonderful person paradigm, people don't believe you. And that was something that I was terrified of, that nobody would believe me. Fortunately, my immediate family did, but it did take me years and years later into my adult life before I was even able to admit to myself that, yes, this event did happen, and it has affected you, and admit it to my family as well. So that is something that I think desperately needs to change. And that paradigm in the United States is alive and well. And it's so alive that when the Me Too movement started, people were writing Me Too for the first times in their lives. And it was so debilitating for some people who had put Me Too up there. It was the first time they had ever even acknowledged that they had experienced one of these 3 things. And as a result, well, I think they were both terrified and empowered by the whole movement. So if you have a whole population afraid to even say Me Too, afraid to say 2 words, then something's got to change in this culture. So instead of looking at the paradigm of good person or monster, I really wish our society could look at it as somebody can do public good and also private bad. And that, in my opinion, has to be our new paradigm. Yes, people are capable of many things. They're capable of good things, and they're capable of bad things. Nobody is completely wonderful, and nobody is completely horrible. And I feel as though that's what we need to come closer to help victims or survivors, and to help the families and friends that have to cope with this difficult truth.
And how does your book move the conversation about violence forward?
So I think that my book fits squarely into the Me Too movement, but I also believe that my book actually talks about having difficult conversations around these topics. A lot of times I fall flat on my face during my discussions of violence and race, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do a beautiful job talking about these things, but it's messy. And what I really want people to know is that it's not easy and it's not clean. You know, it's a messy process and it's a difficult process, but it's an important process. I feel that we need to learn how to bear witness to women's stories and men's, anybody who has experienced abuse. We need to learn how to talk about violence in a way that allows us to see the person who has committed the violence as a human being rather than as a monster, to help survivors and their families. And I also feel that we need to become more comfortable in general with talking about difficult things, because, maybe people haven't been survivors of violence, but they are survivors of something. And our society likes to brush it under the rug. Our society likes to say, okay, a couple months have passed, you should be moving on. And I often wonder, maybe it's not time to move on. Maybe I don't even want to move on, right? Maybe the being in, one with this truth is really refreshing, and I need to stay here, and just take in what has happened. Maybe that's what needs to happen, that we need to allow for this to happen in our society. So everybody's experienced difficulty, but we try to brush it under the rug. A lot of people are ashamed. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, and we don't create space in our society for those who do.
How does your book fit in with who you are, what you value, and how you inhabit the world?
So I used to hide my truth, as I spoke about a little earlier, but now I talk about it, and I inhabit the world as a survivor and as a person with a voice who is human, makes mistakes, but also picks herself up from those mistakes and can talk about it. And so I feel as though my book inhabits a new space as well. One where it's okay to experience hardship, one where it's okay to talk about hardship, and one where it's okay to create space for those who have experienced hardship in the past or currently experiencing hardship. So I feel as though I inhabit the world very differently. I have a voice. I have a book that I've written that I'm very proud of. And I am happy to talk about my truth. And I speak with my own voice and my own truth every second of every day. I don't try to hide from the world anymore.
And who are your readers, and what do you want their takeaway message to be from all the silent spaces?
So my readers are anybody who's experienced hardship, whether it be death, violence, racism, anything that's taken your world and spun it around and thrown you, off of your feet. That is who my book is for. And so basically my book is for anybody who has experienced difficulty, and that means all of us. I think that everybody who has experienced trauma can benefit from my book. I feel as though anyone who has experienced struggle can benefit from my book. It's really about a woman who ends up flat on the ground, and in front of her children, and has to stop the world, her world from spinning out of control, and regain confidence, but from a new place, from a different space. And we all have to do that at times.
So Christine's book is available on Amazon, and if you want to find out more, you can go to her website, ChristineRistaino.com. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we wish you a lot of success.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.